I'm David Scranton, and who would have guessed that achieving all of your retirement dreams boils down to one single word, and that is income. You guessed it, it's that time again, time to tune out the hype and focus on the facts. Facts that matter to you, the income generation. Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us on today's show. You know, I am so incredibly happy that more and more people are talking about income. Why? Because I've been working to expose the secret for most of my own career. In fact, if I look familiar, chances are you've seen my show, The Income Generation, on Newsmax. For 4 years, I had the pleasure of interviewing and bringing to you some of the top financial experts in the world. Folks like Stephen Forbes, John Najarian, Muhammad Alarian, Susie Orman. I invested myself fully in that effort and had a ton of fun doing it. But now it's time to get serious. It's time to make a new investment directly in you. The Income Generation 2.0 is our all-new streamlined, and not just streamlined because I'm wearing a blue shirt instead of a white shirt, but it's a streamlined and turbocharged version of the show designed to be faster, more efficient, and to focus directly on my greatest passion. And that, of course, is teaching hardworking Americans like you how to achieve your retirement goals and dreams by investing for income. In fact, it's a passion that started with me over 20 years ago and has led to the launch of 3 new businesses, 3 best-selling books, multiple social media platforms, a radio show, and of course, the TV show. Yes, the secret is out, and more Americans than ever today are looking for advisors that specialize in income. But you know, at the same time, there are still far too many over 50 investors out there that are relying on what I look at as being outdated, impractical financial strategies. Strategies that might actually put their retirement goals at risk. And perhaps you're one of them. Perhaps you haven't heard the secret yet. Or maybe you have, but you still have misconceptions about investing for income. And these misconceptions are keeping you on the fence. Well, we're going to fix all that on the Income Generation 2.0, and we're going to start by answering the most basic question: why income? We'll also reveal the truth about what it means to get maximum return and how that could have a different meaning for different people. Also, we'll clear up some of the most common and potentially some of the most costly misconceptions about investing. And we'll do it all with the help of several income specialists. Now, if you did watch my Newsmax show, this guy here probably looks familiar too. Jeff Small was my co-host on The Income Generation, and he's back to help me out on our new turbocharged model. Jeff is president of Arbor Financial Services in Melbourne, Florida, and he's also author of the Amazon best-selling book, Turning Financial Planning Right Side Up. Jeff, welcome. It's great to be here with you today.
Hey, thanks, Dave. It's great to be here. Even though I already know the answer, why income?
Well, let me answer that, if I may, with another question. And that is, what's the difference between a 16-year-old and a 60-year-old?
Well, I shouldn't say this, but probably hair or no hair.
Right. In your case, hair or no hair. In my case, hair or very little hair, right?
That's right.
And it's a great answer. But there's obviously many more answers than that. The important one, when it comes to money, has to do with goals. See, at age 16, and I know this doesn't apply to you, but a lot of 16-year-olds really don't have any goals. You came out of the womb as a financial advisor. You had goals at age 1. I get that, Jeff. But for most 16-year-olds, they haven't settled on goals yet. However, at our age, as you get closer to 60, our goals tend to be much, much more specific. And as an example, many of them are circling around the concept of retirement. Maybe you want to pay off your debts. Maybe you want to downsize. Maybe start a new business or devote more time to your favorite hobbies. Perhaps you want to travel or you want to move closer to grandchildren. Those are the types of goals that most people have in their 60s. And I call them purpose-based goals. Why? Because they give purpose to your saving and investment plan. In my experience, most people are purpose-based investors. And that's different from performance-based investing. There, somebody has a goal to simply achieve maximum portfolio growth with no specific purpose in mind, just for bragging rights as if it were some sort of competition. And again, most people, thankfully, are purpose-based investors. And once you realize that, it's important to ask yourself this question. How do I pay for my purpose-based goals when I retire? By selling shares from my investments or through my regular income stream? Well, after more than 30 years in this business, I can tell you the answer for 99.9% of the people, just like Ivory Soap, is income. So Jeff, now that I answer the question, how do you answer the question when somebody says to you, why invest for income?
Well, Dave, it's really simple. It's a lifestyle choice, purpose versus performance. When you make that transition out of the private sector into retirement, you've got a realization that hits you in that transition that says, hey, I got to be more focused on income. I can't retire unless I have the right amount of income. So how much am I going to get from Social Security, from my pension, from my investments? What are my fixed expenses? And so that's a very purpose-driven issue, not performance-driven issue, Dave.
Now, you weren't always an income-based advisor, neither was I. Just share with our viewers, our listeners for a moment, what caused you to make that transition to really be income-focused in your practice?
Well, I think that, like I said before, when you retire, you got to have income. And so if we want to deliver to our clients, then we have to educate them on what the universe of income generating options are and help them understand what type of income can be created through dividends and yields and utilizing bond and bond-like instruments. And so that emphasis has been dramatically underemphasized during their entire working career, but not only during the career, but by all of the representatives in the financial realm that they may have worked with, Dave.
Yeah. Very true. Great answer. I love it. It's time to take a question, an Ask Dave question, if you will. Tim from Michigan chimes in and he says, doesn't investing for income mean getting out of the stock market? Gosh, the stock market's been doing so incredibly well. Why would I want to get out at a time like this? Tim, great question. And the answer is you may not want to get out of the stock market. Investing for income, we call it going from the G to the I. In fact, we'll talk about that coming up a bit in the show, from growth to income. You can do that in the stock market or out of the stock market. Now, there are pros and cons to each. If you do it out of the stock market in the universe that Jeff and I often refer to as the world of bonds and bond-like instruments, now you have a contract with an issuer that says this is how much income you're going to get. The only way that income could stop or decrease is if that company in which you're investing goes bankrupt, essentially defaults on the debt. You can go from the G to the I and get income in the stock market also, and there's a little more risk there. Because remember, stocks can cut dividends. Companies can cut dividends. But also remember the other side, over time, with good healthy companies in the US stock market, dividends tend to increase, not decrease. So in most cases, I find a mix between stocks and bond-like instruments really being the right answer. All right, time to take a quick commercial break. We'll be back in a moment to talk about the most important mathematical formula you need to know in the investment world. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Scranton. When it came time for my mom to retire, one simple mistake forced her to work years longer than she should have. And that's why I started the Retirement Income Store, to help hardworking Americans 55 and over plan for the retirement they deserve. I couldn't help my mom, but maybe I can help you.
If you're 55 or older, please claim our free Retirement Income Kit. Chock full of information you need to know to get steady income during your retirement. Call 866-314-7227. Online at the Retirement Income Store.
Welcome back to the Income Generation 2.0. I'm David Scranton, and it's great to be here with you as usual. Let's take a minute and talk about the philosophy behind living off your interest. Now, maybe you didn't have specific goals when you were 16 years old, but hopefully you had a smart mom. And if so, you may have heard her give you the sage advice. Live off your interest and don't touch your principal. And it probably wasn't advice that you could use right away, but hopefully you knew it made a lot of sense and you stored it in the memory banks for later. Well, guess what? It is later. And the fact is, the 5 to 10 years leading up to retirement is the perfect time to start putting your mom's advice to good use. Think about it this way. How does the amount of money you have in the bank or in investments actually affect your everyday life? Well, okay, maybe there's a little bit of a sense of comfort knowing it's there, granted, but it's typically not what you use to pay the bills, to buy groceries, to go out to dinner, take a vacation. You use your income for that. And how is that going to change once you retire? Well, really, it's not. The only thing that will change or should change is how your income is generated. See, ever since you entered the workforce, your weekly paycheck has been your source of income. And once you retire, obviously that's no longer the case. But it doesn't mean the money you've saved should suddenly affect your daily life, unless your plan is to draw from it until you run out and then call Dr. Kevorkian and, oh, that's right, he's not alive anymore. That plan just won't work. And anyways, even if he were, I would still assure you that would be the wrong plan. Because even worse, you could have a plan that puts you at risk of spending down your savings without even realizing it. And if so, again, it's not the right plan. The right plan is the one your mother advised. Live off your interest and don't touch your principal. More accurately, it's having a plan strategically designed to generate income return in the form of interest and dividends. So here's a little formula that is so important that I'm actually thinking about putting it on a line of t-shirts and bumper stickers, because that's how important it is. And it stands for total return equals income plus growth. And it highlights one of the most common misconceptions there is about investing. And that misconception is the belief that return and growth are the same, because they're not. You see, total return is a sum of both growth and income. Growth, of course, is measured by capital appreciation, right? That's what you typically invest for during the accumulation stage of your life, for most of us, at least up to age 50. But income is measured in interest and dividends. And there are strategies designed to generate income at competitive rates while helping to protect your principal all at the same time. And you know, that actually means helping to protect it from market volatility and the risk of being forced to spend down principal. But even better, it means you'll have a strategy designed to achieve your purpose-based retirement goals, and that you'll finally be making your mom happy by following her good advice. So now it's time to bring Jeff back. Jeff, I've got to ask you, you've been doing this a long time as I have. So when somebody says to you, well, why can't I just do some research and invest for income myself in my own portfolio? Why do I need you, Jeff? How do you answer that?
Well, look, Dave, if somebody was really smart and wanted to dedicate themselves several hours a day of reading financials, paying for external research on investments like fixed income investments that generate interest and earnings, maybe they could do it themselves, maybe. But you always say it's simple and not easy, Dave. Why do you say that?
Well, that's one reason, is that it's if you're good at mathematics, especially in the world of bonds and bond-like instruments, it can be relatively simple. But then the execution thereof is a bit more difficult. So it's one of those things where, as a good friend of mine says, the cleanliness of theory is really no match for the messiness of reality. But most of the time when I talk about simple but not easy, I'm talking about why everybody wants maximum return with minimum risk and why that's such a challenge. And it's because people need to think about what they want maximum return for. Right? Is it going to be because they want to just leave a big legacy when they're gone? Are they going to use the money ultimately to cash out their investments and make a lump sum purchase? Or are they going to use their investments to generate retirement income? So when you say maximum return, what you're really saying, Jeff, is maximum return for what purpose? And as you know, most of our clients that are approaching retirement, their number one goal is to generate retirement income. But yet they're still thinking old-fashioned. They're still thinking about maximizing total return when really, as you know, they should be thinking about maximizing income. So let me ask you this, Jeff. What do you tell your clients as to why none of the advisors they've ever been exposed to over the course of their lives have exposed them to this great secret known as investing for income?
Well, I think it's an industry problem, Dave. It's not a particular advisor's problem. The industry's been hypercentric on growth and investing in the market, and the market is the panacea. That's where you have to be. But that works when we're working and we're in our careers. It does not work when we retire. and we need to generate income from our investments. And most retirees recognize that, and they would much rather have slow and steady at 4% income versus chasing 7-8% returns and riding the roller coaster and creating income. You can end up very quickly on the short end of the stick. And we've gone through that before, haven't we, Dave?
Oh, we have. And maybe I'm more of a conspiracy theorist than you, although I don't like to think of myself that way. But I think part of it also is that when you invest for growth, it's riskier. And I think that if most advisors feel like they can charge higher commissions or higher fees if they've got somebody in a riskier strategy. So I'm sure a lot of it's benign, as you said, but I think some of it is really because of the business model, unfortunately, of most financial advisors also. Now let's bring in our next guest, Matthew Johnson, a good friend of the income generation. Matthew is the owner of Johnson Wealth and Income Management, a retirement income store located in Iowa. He's a radio host and host of the YouTube channel, The Capitalized Life. Matthew, thanks so much for being back with us today.
Hey, you're welcome, Dave.
Hey, Matthew, it's great to see you. We just covered in the show total return equals income plus growth. So give us your idea on how you convey to your customers, how do we explain the difference between income plus growth? What's the difference there, MJ?
Well, I think so many people, they tend to think that growth is just capital appreciation, but they tend to forget you can grow your money the old-fashioned way through interest and dividends. You know, thinking back in history, how many millionaires have we seen that have passed away? And when we studied what their investment philosophy was, it was that safe, steady return of interest and dividends on their principal, compounding year after year. And we can't forget that it's exciting to put points on the board, but there's other ways that you can grow your net worth as well.
Okay, I agree with you on that. But how do we explain the income part of the equation then? That might be the growth side, but how do we convey the income side?
Well, the income side is going to be more contractual. It's going to be more steady. You know, there's a universe of tools that are out there that we can put our money into, our principal that we've worked so hard for, that will provide us that steady stream of interest and dividends as long as we're holding those fixed income type investments. And as we get older, we know that the cost of living is likely to be going up. We see the trend of what's happening. We know that we're going to need to potentially draw more and more from our principal and have income. So the question becomes, do you want to cannibalize your principal in order to get the income, or do you start to transition your principal into the production of income so you get more of an output naturally and consistently month after month?
So Matthew, in a minute, we're going to actually talk in the show about the real problem. People procrastinate and they wait too long to make that transition from the G to the I, but you're kind of a man after my own heart because you have a pilot analogy, which of course, you know, I love pilot analogies. Why don't you share with our audience your pilot analogy as to why you shouldn't wait too long?
Well, think of it this way. If you're, flying in a commercial flight and you're at 30,000 feet, well before you actually get to the destination, the pilot always comes on and says, we're about to begin our descent. They don't just fly right over the top of the tarmac and then drop straight down. They actually start that descent right well before they actually get to the runway. And the idea is that we want to be able to start making these transitions towards retirement. We know that it's coming. We know that it's going to be in our future. And so why would we want to wait until the day after we retire to start making this transition and getting ourselves prepared for this income and distribution stage of our life? Why not begin that transition sooner so that you're able to smoothly transition into retirement, having the income already there and available?
Yep. And as you say, not free fall your way into retirement. Matthew, as usual, some great words of wisdom. Thanks for being back with us here. And you stay with us. We have more coming up in just a moment right here on the Income Generation. We'll be right back.
For behind-the-scenes photos, retirement planning tips, and upcoming giveaways, follow the Income Generation Show on Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch video clips, guest interviews, and to catch up on past episodes.
Welcome back to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and it's great to be here with you. I realize that some people are put off by the very idea of so-called conservative financial strategies. In fact, Many automatically think that less risk equals less return, and that investing for income means sacrificing return. But you know, like I said at the top of the show, there are a lot of misconceptions about investing for income, and that is one of the biggest. So remember our t-shirt, remember our bumper sticker, our formula? Total return is a sum of both growth and income. It's not growth or income. It's not an either or proposition. You don't stop growing your savings once you've made the shift from growth to income. You simply start growing it in a more strategic way, in a way that's designed to better protect your principal and to create larger future streams of income. So here's an example that I've been using lately to explain this. Let's say that you're going to retire 5 years from now, and you've got $1 million in your portfolio. Your plan is to keep investing for growth. And you assume that your money will be able to grow, let's say, at 8% per year for the next 5 years. Then, right about the day you retire, you're going to snap your fingers and you're going to transition from a growth-based strategy to an income-based strategy where you can earn 4%. That's how a lot of people think it's done. But here's the problem. Sure, you might get that 8% growth, or you might get a lot less, or even a loss. Because worst case, the market might drop by 50% or more, or take 7 years to recover again, like it did in 2000. And again, the drop that started at the end of 2007. Remember those? So what would that do to your purpose-based retirement goals? Could you even retire when you planned? Or would you have to keep working for those additional 7 years? See, I actually anticipated those questions in the late 1990s when I was doing some of my own independent stock market research. Back then, I had accurately forecast the bursting of the dot-com bubble and that first devastating drop that took so many other advisors and investors by surprise. And that's when I changed from a typical growth-based business model to one specializing in income. It was to protect my clients, most of whom were retired or near retirement at that time. And it wasn't long before I realized that this thing I call the income model not only made sense for older investors at that time, but all the time, in part because it minimized or it actually eliminated a huge unknown factor. That factor are the whims of Wall Street. But let's say that your plan did work. The stock market cooperated, and you got that 8% growth that you were gambling on. And let's say again, you had $1 million to start with. Here's how the math works out. You'd end up getting about $58,000 a year once you convert it to 4% income 5 years in the future. But instead, let's say the worst scenario happened and the market took that huge drop and you were earning just a 1.5% dividend yield, as most people do today in the stock market. Odds are you no longer want to switch to income after retirement. Why? Because you'd want to hang in there. You'd want to try to recover your losses. And in that case, the math says you could end up counting on just $16,000 of annual income instead of $58,000. Why? Because that 1.5% dividend yield is now the only known factor in your plan. And there's a huge difference between $16,000 and $58,000, right? But instead, let's say that you didn't wait and you shifted your strategy to investing for income at an interest or dividend yield of 4% now, 5 years before retirement. What happens then? Well, we're going to do the math in just a bit. But before we do that, Jeff, you know, you've been doing this a long time, and we always talk about growing your money the organic way. That just because you're earning interest or dividends doesn't mean you have to spend those. So how do you engineer growth that way if you're not quite retired yet? How do you tell your clients to do that?
So Dave, everybody wants growth. The way to do that is by investing their dividends. And by investing their dividends, what's happening is they're dollar cost averaging in whether the market goes up or down. If the market drops and they're reinvesting those dividends, what are they doing? They're improving their yields. And that's going to improve their market value over time and increase their income. But changing subjects for a minute, Dave, we had a couple of big corrections in 2008, big correction in March of last year, recovered very quickly. Can that happen again? What do you think?
Yeah, of course, the fact that it happened just twice in the last century, 3 times when you include March, tells us, of course, yes, it can happen again. But a lot of people, are always questioning, well, gosh, we had it happen in 2000, 2007. This last one we recovered so quickly. So do we really have to worry about a 7-year period underwater? Well, the answer is, of course you do. You know, in reality, the only reason we recovered so quickly in March of 2020 is because the unprecedented levels of involvement by Congress and by the Fed, right? Congress came out with the CARES Act, sent checks to everybody in America pretty much to stimulate the economy. I know we didn't get our checks, but a lot of Americans did. And I also know that the Federal Reserve came in and they committed to more money in quantitative easing in the short run than they did through the entire financial crisis, Jeff. And you know, that caused really a quick V-shaped recovery where in 4 or 5 months, the market was back, okay? But, you know, again, talking about income, I know one of the ways you always tell people is not the proper way or the best way to go from the G to the I is to use bond funds. So how do you like to explain to people what the problems are with bond mutual funds and why they're not the best solution in the world of the I?
Well, there's a number of different reasons, Dave. They're not good solutions. But if you own a bond mutual fund, you essentially own stock in a company that's buying bonds. And so you don't really have the same guarantees that you would have by investing by contract had you owned the individual bond, which is much more preferable over buying a bond mutual fund where an investment manager or the fund manager is going to do whatever he wants and he's not going to be principal protection driven, Dave. I've seen consumers get more hurt by bond funds than helped.
Now it's time to welcome our next income specialist, our good friend Sam McElroy, CEO of Stride Financial, a retirement income store in Chicago, Illinois. Sam, thanks so much for being back with us here on The Income Generation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Hey, Sam, you know, you've got a background in psychology, and we know that everybody has a financial depth perception. But when you're within 5 years of retirement, a lot of investors, pre-retirees will feel that they want to have some more money in growth. Is that a misconception or a misunderstanding? Because eventually they need to transition to income, correct?
Yeah, they absolutely, you know, investing for growth at the end of the day is a two-step process because ultimately you have to find a way to transition into income. And it's a question of when you do it. And this is an area where, you know, our psychological processes wreak havoc in our financial decisions because not only is it an opportunity for the whole casino analogy where when things are going well, you have no reason to think it's ever going to stop. And so people end up waiting too long and then they miss the boat. But if we think about what happens psychologically, it sets the whole tone for retirement because it erodes your confidence. You know, when you make this big mistake and now you end up being double-minded and you're guessing all your other future, decisions that you have to make around financial things, it becomes really problematic because you're always thinking, well, I did this before and I thought it was going to work out this way, but it didn't. So can I really trust myself moving forward? And confidence is the main thing that allows us to enjoy the freedom to spend money in retirement. And if that's gone, you may have money, but you may not enjoy it.
And think about the anxiety that goes with that too, right? Imagine now, being the husband in the household as you are, and you promise your wife, honey, I'm going to retire in 5 years, and the markets go against you. And now you're looking at that $16,000 of income versus the $58,000. You know, I mean, just as a man who wants to take care of your family, I mean, how would that affect you emotionally if things go sideways?
Well, it's exactly what you said. It's not only an opportunity for increased anxiety, it's an opportunity for depression. It's an opportunity for marital strife. Because at the end of the day, there's a real world implication, which is something that you planned on doing in retirement now has to get cut. And it's a question of what is it? Is it spending time with the kids or the grandkids? Is it the traveling that you wanted to do? Is it the house you wanted to live in? Something's going to have to go. And that means that not only are you going to, have the pressure from an anxiety standpoint or a depression standpoint, but it also means that there may be the potential for greater conflict, which could lead down a whole lot of other roads as well.
I love what you said too at the beginning of the segment when you said, the other thing is you start to lose your confidence in making decisions where now you're frozen with fear. You're afraid to make any financial decision for the rest of your life. And as you know, financial decisions don't end the day you retire. They go on forever. So Sam, thanks so much for being back with us. It's been our pleasure. And thank you, and stay with us. We have more coming up here on The Income Generation in just a moment as we explore the better alternative than procrastinating. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Scranton. During my career, I found that most baby boomers have done a great job growing their retirement savings, yet many don't know how to convert their savings into steady income. And that is why I built the Retirement Income Store, to help hardworking Americans preserve their assets and establish steady streams of income.
If you're 55 or older, our free retirement income kit is for you. It's chock full of information you need to know to get steady income during your retirement. Call 866-710-1749. Online at the Retirement
Welcome back to the Income Generation 2.0. I'm David Scranton, your host, and it's great to have you here today. So, okay, let's review what we've discussed so far on this show. Earlier, I showed how a typical retirement strategy, one geared toward growth, might play out in a best and worst case scenario. In the best case, you kept your $1 million in savings invested in growth-based strategies, and you hope to get 8% per year in the 5 years before retirement. And guess what? You got it. But then a day after retirement, you snapped your fingers, boom, you changed your strategy to start investing for income to the tune of 4%. And with the additional almost $500,000 you earned over that 5 years, that 4% worked out to $58,000 a year for retirement. Not bad, right? But now let's review the worst case scenario. You did the same thing. You invested for an assumed growth rate of 8% for those 5 years, but you didn't get it. And even worse, the stock market dropped by 50% and still hadn't returned to its previous peak within 5 years. It happened in 2000, again in 2007, so of course it could happen again. Even though all your anticipated capital gains turned to losses, the good news is you were getting a 1.5% average dividend yield, and you still are. In fact, from the start, it was really the only known factor in your plan. So let's review how the math looks using just that dividend return. Well, unfortunately, now instead of $58,000 of income, you're getting just $16,000. Could you achieve your purpose-based retirement goals with that? Could you retire at all, or would you have to keep working? Tough questions, but I think I know the answers. So let's take a look at what happens when you take that big unknown factor out of the equation. Let's look at what happens if you shift your strategy to investing for 4% income today, 5 years before retirement. Well, what happens is you can count on getting $40,000 interest and dividend returns starting right away, which will grow to $48,000 per year of annual retirement income after 5 years. In other words, while the best case scenario in the income strategy isn't quite as good as the growth-based option, it eliminated the worst case scenario of $16,000 a year. And again, since it starts generating interest and dividends right away, that's income you don't need yet because you're still working. And as Jeff said a moment ago, it means that you can grow your savings the organic way, okay? Not through capital gains, but through reinvestment of interest and dividends. And you can continue that process throughout retirement with any interest or dividend return that you don't need for income, again, even after you're retired. And if you have the right risk tolerance, then, essentially it gets even better. So, Jeff, so the question then is, how does it get better, okay? If I've got the risk tolerance for it and I still want to be in the game, I want to get some growth, right? But I want to go from the G to the I, then share with our viewers, our listeners, how one does that.
So Dave, one of the ways you stay in the game on the growth side is to purchase value stocks with good dividends. That's good for a consumer if they want that growth and they want some income in combination with that in unison. However, there's a misconception there, isn't there, between value and growth stocks? That growth stocks are easier to pick or value stocks are easier to pick, Dave. Can you clear it up for us?
Sure, yeah, it's funny because you can get a dividend yield, as you know, of over 4% in good dividend-oriented, value-oriented portfolios. But the answer is, most people think that investing for value and dividends is easier than growth, right? I just pick a few blue chip stocks with a high dividend. They're not going to go bankrupt. I don't worry about them. But growth is more difficult when, Jeff, as you know, the opposite is really true. Investing for growth is easy, right? You can take an Apple and Amazon after a few upticks, a few days in a row when things are going well, and you can buy them and you can ride that momentum up, because that's what growth investing really is momentum investing. And then trail some stop losses, and when the stock comes down, boom, you're out. You've played with the house's money. But with value-oriented strategies, it's different, because in order to get a high dividend yield, you're buying essentially stocks that are out of favor. That's why the price is down, and that's why the yield looks so attractive. So the key is to differentiate between those that are permanently out of favor, that might be declining long-term on the tail end of the mature part of their corporate life cycle, versus those that are just temporarily down in value and have drivers that are going to bring them back up again. So that's why investing for value, investing in high dividend strategies is actually more difficult than just investing for growth. But why is it so important to have the right risk tolerance if you're going to stay in the game, even 5 years out of retirement, to go from the G to the I, but keep that upside potential?
Well, I think that's an individual question for many different people based on what their situation is. But if you've got income that you need to create, then technically that shouldn't be in the G category of investments. That should not be correlated, Dave, because that doesn't work out over time. So if you've got enough money saved, you should have a balance between both and find an equilibrium there that works based on your own personal risk tolerance and your income needs. And it is a balancing act, Dave. It's a seesaw.
Well, you're absolutely right. You got to have the right risk tolerance, because at the end of the day, in stocks, dividends can get cut. The stock market can drop by half. And you got to be able to sleep at night. So very good points, Jeff. Now let's welcome our final income specialist, Michael Eastham, a great friend of the income generation. Michael is founder of Fellowship Financial Group, a retirement income store located just outside of Orlando. He's also Amazon best-selling author of the book, Common Sense Income Strategies. Michael, thanks so much for being back with us on the show.
It's always good to be here, guys.
So, Mike, how do we explain income disparities between fixed income investing and growth investing to our customers? How do you do that?
Well, thanks for asking. That's a great question, and it's always good to be here with you. One of the things that I always find is that it's the classic tortoise versus the hare mindset. Everybody wants to be the hare in terms of speed and growth and all those exciting things, but they don't recognize the fact that that the tortoise, who's just plodding along, making consistent, regular progress, is the one who is really going to end up winning the game in the end. Why? Because it's less stressful. It provides, consistent income. Even if you don't need that income, the benefit is that income compounds on itself. And then year after year after year, you end up with more income at the end of your working years. So when you're ready to retire, you have a larger chunk of consistent income. So that's one of the easiest ways that I've found that it's that we can explain it to our clients, and they start to get it. But it's a mind shift for a lot of people because they've grown up in the .com era. They grew up in the technology era, where it's all about growth. It's 12 to 15%. If you can't get it for me, then I'm just not interested. We have to change that mindset, and that's what we try to do with folks in our office.
And it's fun. It's funny as we discussed briefly, Mike. And you don't even need to necessarily get out of the stock market to go from the G to the I. But even if you did, what you're saying is really, it's still the most prudent strategy: the tortoise versus the hare. Think about it. The numbers you just heard us go over just a moment ago, right? If you said to your clients, look, 5 years from now, you're going to retire, and you have a choice. You can choose to have either $16,000 of income or $58,000, total disparity, or you can have pretty much $48,000, you know what you're going to get. Would any of your clients take the disparity of 16 gambling for the 58?
Yeah, it's way too much of a dice roll. It's like going to Vegas. You just don't know. If you can have predictable, consistent income that is going to pay your bills and help you to accomplish the goals and dreams that you worked your entire life for in retirement, we're going to take that every single time. And that's really the goal of what we try to accomplish for folks.
Yeah, you need to have consistent income, just like when you were working, just before you retired, same thing, counting on that paycheck coming in on a regular basis. Michael, thanks so much for being back with us here on The Income Generation. It's been our pleasure as usual. And thank you so much for joining me here on the Income Generation 2.0. And of course, a special thanks to Jeff Small and all of our guest advisors. We've had a blast here today with you. And as I said at the top of the show, I've devoted most of the last 20 years to spreading the word, to revealing the secret about investing for income. I've made a huge investment in that effort, which, yes, has paid off. And now I'm making this investment directly in you. I hope you'll join me here again to continue learning much more about how investing for income can help you, whoever you are, achieve your retirement goals and dreams with more certainty and less stress. Until then, take care. And remember, it's all about the income.